So far, when it comes to this channel, I've done everything that I wanted to do. I'm really fulfilling what I came to do on this channel. However, the one thing that I am going to accomplish today, and the course of multiple videos, is right here upon us now, as I, yes I, am the best Disney Infinity player in the world, as far as I'm aware. You see, I would say I got the 2.0 version and then the 3.0 version. I eventually had all the characters purchased. I want to just give you a bit of my background, while also explain to you why this matters a lot to me. It is how it is. I had fun playing this game because of the novelty of you buying a character and putting it on. The choice of life aspect basically got me soaked in, and it was recognizable characters, and there were characters at the time I was really excited about. Whenever I played the missions, I did all these things. There's one interesting aspect that really stood out to me due to the limitations or due to just the situations I was in. But when I was slowly playing the game and with actual people, and I remember Avengers playset where you had a player versus player setting going on Avengers Tower. I remember playing that a lot against my cousin, who, although his other brother was pretty good, especially compared to me, I just enjoyed playing the game and I just wanted to give them a little competition. We obviously wanted to try it out and were fans of similar games such as that in terms of combat versus combat. And at the time, we also played with other similar games, although Disney Infinity is loosely like that, as the game is not intended to be a game like Super Smash Bros. Or other fighting games for that matter. But we had fun and we had some rivalries going. We also had a bunch of battles that were very decisive for my cousin, and he was the main reason I wanted to be good at this game, at least when it came to player versus player battles. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't have been so caring upon that. I asked the same people multiple times if I could play the game with them in this exact same way, and they usually didn't care after I beat them, of course. But although that's only because they knew I was better than them and they just wanted me to practice or just feel prideful upon it, which I will admit I kind of was. At the same time, I just enjoyed doing the player versus player games, and as time went on, I occasionally had more battles against my cousin, who I will say, because I did over the years when I was curious, because I wanted to know if I, as a random person, I was never going to make a video like this where I talk about all these characters. Who would? And I looked online, nobody really cared like I did, nobody really saw the game like I did, and nobody had the skills I did with the characters. It's hard because we live in a world where there's so many possibilities, there's so many things we miss out on, even though we have a good resource on looking and finding things out. From what I was able to look at, I couldn't see anybody, and that's mostly because nobody really played the game that way, except for mostly against someone they personally knew. So in terms of me being good at the game officially, even though you could say it's equivalent to competing in a local level, I will say it's the closest thing to a competition or a tournament of a big size, or a meaningful size for that matter. It had around 16 people. I can't think of any other tournaments that would have around 16 players. and it was featured in a household. I can't think of any tournaments that were around where you go and you play on a console. There wasn't really online stuff, really. The game wasn't made for it. That's why I just enjoyed discovering certain things, or enjoyed looking at the game through that way. And there might be people out there that I'm clearly not aware of that are possibly better than me. The problem is I haven't played them from my point of view. But I would say from what I've seen, and everyone else to me just doesn't exist in my world. I guess I could call myself the best just because of what I've accomplished. I was literally undefeated for multiple tournaments whenever I was able to show up at their place. Other person, they might be good. We'll never know. This game wasn't made for this type. Otherwise, I would have loved to be challenged, trying to see where everyone's at. And you know what? Because I care enough to make these videos, and care enough to wait a bunch of years to talk about these characters and put my perspective on it, I think I'm just gonna crown myself that. And this might be the only time where I'm gonna have an ego this big in my life, and I am totally okay with that. Anyways, yes, my cousin was the only one was ever challenged to me in terms, even when I was in my peak, he was the only one that had enough of a idea on how to beat me. Even though I did let him win from time to time whenever we played, just so I could continue with experience on the game from that angle. If it wasn't for him and for other things that exist, such as people discovering certain move sets or combos, and even the discoveries I personally discovered that I could not find anyone else discovering, I am happy that I've done my best to see the game for a more serious level. I'm so happy I found all this information either from me looking it up or from other people. I am so grateful. Believe me, if I didn't knew all this information, I probably would have a way bad understanding on how good each character is if I didn't have the experience or understanding as I do now. This might be the only time where I feel good at something or feel accomplished at something. Everything else I feel like I'm just very average. But anyways, let's just get down to business now. I know this is an interesting way to start off this tier list of mine, but this is overall an introduction on why you should take what I'm saying a little bit more seriously than you probably would have. At the end of the day, you might see the game differently at a more casual way, and that's fine. But take my opinions a little bit more into account, or I might know things that you might not know. And if you already know them and you still disagree with them, then that's perfectly fine. If we actually did tournaments, there would have to be possibly a rule set for this. Flying characters and cars characters, all these things we have to take into consideration. Overall, when you look at the whole roster of characters, and I can't even think of every possible matchup because there's so many matchups, because there's so many playable characters in this series. The amount of matchups and the amount of information you could possibly think of, I would need so much more experience or assistance, or a whole lot more understanding that I'm never going to receive on my own. There might be certain characters that are way better and way worse than each other. I will say, when I'm thinking about these characters, and of course because this game isn't made to be played this way, take a look at the characters based on them at what they are capable of doing and not limiting them. That's why we are not adding in tools or packs including the characters, just the characters as themselves, and we are not limiting the characters in any way possible. And if we look at all the characters, what they're able to do, this game if it were to be a competitive game with no limitations on any character, this would be a completely unbalanced game. Completely bullying meta, unfair, where you have to choose certain characters in order to be just as good, or if not better, than your opponent. Is counter-picking impossible matchups as you could possibly think of. The worst character being the best character would be literally impossible unless you draw so hard or you have some sort of ability that keeps you from being successful whatsoever. Otherwise, yeah, it's that bad. There's other games I've seen where it sort of reminds you of that, where there's the broken characters, there's the characters that can be a surprise and stay in the arena. There's some characters that are not as bad as the worst characters, and the worst characters are literally non-existent in the game. There are games that remind me of that and might remind you of that, but I can't think of a game that, if we were to have it, is free, except not having the packs and tools. Because literally if you add packs and tools, then no character would be that different from each other. The gap is so significant, it would be so much worse. We want to see how good the character actually is, how that compares with everyone else. And we are looking at 3.0. We're rating all these characters on how good they are in 3.0, because 2.0, 1.0, not only are some of the characters not existent in that game, but some of the characters have been changed or altered in terms of damage or moveset. I will not take into consideration about how good they were in the previous games, although I do value how good characters are based off the reputation that has been in the community, and I do understand a bit on why people think certain things about certain characters. My opinion kind of switched around from time to time when it came to these bottom 3 characters, and these 3 characters are easily the worst characters in the game, at least in my eyes. And that's because they don't have a projectile, they don't have anything that really helps them out. They're pretty basic compared to the rest of the roster. And these 3 characters switched around from worst to second worst to the least worst out of 3, from my view, a lot. But I will say from this point, and I'll explain why this character, even though I didn't initially think them as the worst character in the game, it might be possible that they're the worst character in the game just because they didn't have that one thing that I found out that the other characters have. And this will probably give you a hint on what the other 2 worst characters in this game are. Now I'm going to say the worst character in Disney Infinity 3.0 is Randy. Randy Boggs, the villainous Monsters Inc. character. He was a little bit surprising. I always thought of him the least bad of the Monsters Inc. characters. However, the other characters had a surprisingly useful trait compared to Randy that I think would be a little bit beneficial to them. He's the only one that doesn't have it out of the 3, and I think that's a big deal. Now before I go into what that is, I will explain to you what the character at least has. He has 2 jumps. Randy's the first character I mentioned that has a super jump. His range attack is a roar, but the interesting part of it is compared to the other 2, I notice it more when I jump and then do an attack in the air, which is a good thing to do because it does a little bit of extra damage because you get the ground pound and then you get the range attack. It has significantly disjointed range. It's very interesting. The move itself isn't that great whatsoever. It is a plus compared to the other characters that have that. Randy also has a good dodge. The way he contorts his body it's very good for moving around compared to Mike and Sulley. I will say though, it's not going to be good enough to dodge projectiles, especially the projectiles that a lot of these characters have. It's good enough to be useful compared to the other two Monsters Inc. characters. Also has this useful thing that the other two Monsters Inc. characters don't have, and that's his ability to turn invisible. Although you could see his outline, the interesting aspect about it is you can't see his icon on the radar. So if you're trying to look for him and he's grabbing health or grabbing some sort of special assistance for himself, you have to either look at his screen, sort of cheating. Not just because you want to know where he's at, right? But it is useful. It makes it harder for your opponent to figure out where they are compared to Mike and Sulley. And there's also a trick where if you aim the camera down and you're going the direction that you're supposed to be going, your opponent doesn't know really where you're going, except you would. It's the first character I mentioned that has a melee attack, which is a shoulder dash. It also sends you more forward, and the reason why that's a big deal, when it comes to so-and-so, they have a shoulder dash or a melee attack that there's a little bit of a trick that they could do with the melee attack, and because Randy's is different and doesn't serve the same purpose as theirs, because of that one little thing, yes, he's the worst character in the entire game because of that. So yeah, Randy has some things better than Sulley and Mike. However, again, because of one singular move, that's the whole reason the character's down here. And let me tell you what that special thing is. Mike is the second worst character in the game. Mike Wazowski. The funny thing is, when it comes to the super jump, it's almost the same height as his double. It's not a very high super jump. He has it regardless. He does everything that Randy could do except turn invisible, and his movement is slightly different, but he's overall the same character everywhere else. Now, what makes Mike the second worst compared to number one worst, his chain grab. He actually has a chain grab, and other characters have a chain grab too. It has a specific timing to it. He has it regardless, and if the opponent doesn't get out of the specific timings required to do it, then it's a guaranteed setup. However, the chain grab, along with Sulley's, because Mike Wazowski and Sulley both have the same chain grab set up because their melee attack, they both function the same way, where if you grab them, throw them down, and then you do the melee attack at a specific point where you're able to quickly grab them again. There's specific melee attacks sends certain characters on the ground and they're stunned. If you're quick enough and you hit it at the right spot, you are able to get a grab after landing the melee attack. Works on specific characters. A good example would be Hulkbuster. That's an easy one to quickly think of because of the way his body contorts and the way the character receives certain attacks. Yes, Mike and Sulley both have specific chain grab subs on some characters of the cast, and that's better than Randy not having any at all. Mike's stats are worse though. At least Sulley, even though his attacks are also really slow, his damage is also not incredibly different from Mike or Randy's. Sulley's super jump is at least a lot better and higher. Mobility, at least for these three characters, Sulley has better mobility in terms of leaping. However, both three of these characters struggle the same way, and it doesn't matter if both of those two characters have chain grabs. If you're not gonna get the grab because you're being outranged or the character is not going to let you come close to them, or simply doesn't work on them, you're gonna be in for a tough fight. You are gonna struggle like you wouldn't believe. These three characters are very similar, but they struggled the same way. The Lone Ranger was a character I initially was going to put into mid-tier, I thought his gun was able to stun, at least in the air. However, in 3.0, and this is the game where we value the characters, in 3.0 he can't do anything but shoot his gun. That's all he has, and he has his little shoulder dash attack that is just as flimsy as the other monsters Inc. attacks. His melee attack doesn't even lead to any chain grabs. It has a lot of cooldown to it. So this character is really bad, especially considering you can't stun characters with his gun. He simply just shoots it. They literally didn't make this character rely on anything other than his gun, and his gun is so bad that he has to be in this spot. I think he somehow manages to still be better than the other Monsters Inc. characters, even though they have chain grabs. It's literally the projectile in my mind that is keeping me from putting him even lower. Next up is Vanellope von Schweetz. She has only 3 abilities. Also the first character I've talked about so far that has a shield. Even though it's very small, it is still useful. She has an interesting visual effect to her attacks, where it's pixelated, such as the ground pound, dash attack. She has interesting projectile. I'm not a fan of it personally. At least she could throw a projectile at the opponent rather than do a roar, which has limited range. However, the weakness to Vanellope's projectile, which is the range attack, is it has no way to aim the attack. If you are at a specific position, that's the only way it can land there. Unless you have it where the red dot is on your opponent, there's no other way for it to properly land there. However, the good thing about the projectile, even though it is a bit hard to do because of the limited use of the projectile actually helps Vanellope with her chain grabbing. Yep, she could chain grab off that cherry bomb of a projectile. A chain grab, just like Mike and Sulley, except the usage is a lot better and more versatile as it works on anyone actually. Vanellope has to work for that grab, or she's gonna be on the offense, while most characters are gonna be on the defense and are easily gonna avoid her as a character, just like the other characters we talked about so far. At least she has a bit of survivability thanks to the shield, which does help. However, it's still not enough. Just because she has a shield doesn't mean it's gonna help her that much. In fact, it's just gonna make the suffering even much worse once she's actually defeated. I didn't mention because I forgot, but a lot of these characters have this ability called Repel, which if you throw out a specific melee attack and you block it, very good if you anticipate a specific attack that throws out. They repel damage on you. That's good counterplay that a lot of characters have. And the reason why the way this game is, it's way better to play without using melee attacks unless you know it's gonna land. If you know that melee attack is going to land, then there's no reason to be afraid of the block. And even if they block, you could anticipate their block or them trying to repel your attack, and you could just ground pound the attack and it intercepts the block and you could continue on attacking them. Basically, there's counterplay to them trying to counterplay you. Just a fun little thing to mention right now. Speaking about timing your moves, Nick Wilde is the first character I mentioned so far to have a time press, which it's not as good as Repel, I would say, but it has the same interaction and purpose as a Repel attack. And Nick Wilde has a proper range attack as well, because Vanellope's you can't aim on the other side of the stick. Nick though, you could aim his popsicle stick anywhere. So the usage is a lot better. Nick's also the first character I mentioned so far that has a charged range attack. He's also the first character I mentioned that has a special move, which if you didn't know, if a character has their meter full after a certain period of time, they get to use their special move. If it's limited to a few times, they can only use it a few times per match, or per game, or per session. If they have multiple, then sometimes that could be a good thing depending on what it is. But most of the time, you're gonna see at least one special meter for each character from 2.0 and 3.0, unless you don't have them added to the skill tree. So Nick has a range attack, okay melee combos, and a super jump. I would still say though that he's the weakest 3.0 character. He has a bad special for versing a player. You could easily avoid it. That attack is so bad. You watch it and you could see how depressing it is. And his melee attacks are slow. They're easy to avoid because of that. His projectile gets the job done. You could easily take him out if you have a simple, quicker projectile. Next up is Hiro. I know a lot of people are very positive when it comes to his character, and he is fun to play, very enjoyable as a character. He is not a good fighter when it comes to the player versus player setting though. He does have a little bit of mobility from his range attack, which is good, but it leaves him vulnerable if you have a projectile which could shoot him out of the range attack. He has unique melee attacks and he has a super jump. He can juggle with the melee attacks at least. So let's say if he's not landing all the hits, the fact that he's able to juggle them, he's able to have a more anticipation on each hit if he were to be prepared for it. However, he is too slow and only strong if you somehow get a lead with this character. He's a very chill character though with his moveset. I do like the way they designed his character. Alright, next up we're gonna talk about Dash. Dash's range attack makes him go fast and can be a smart way to trap your opponent while keeping the player hit for a while. He has quick melee attacks and good counter attacks. Negative to him is he's too weak. Overall, he could be used to move around quickly to get to places quicker. He's better than Vanellope because all his attacks aren't bad and could win him if he uses them on a character. However, he still isn't a defensive character to help him with his strengths. I would call Dash the least threatening as an all-around good character. Everything he has is good, but that doesn't mean he's good enough to be usable. So even though Nick Wilde could honestly give him troubles due to his range attack, I would still say Dash is overall a better character because all of his moves are good compared to Nick Wilde's, who obviously has some weaknesses to him in terms of his moveset. Next up is Mr. Incredible. His range attack does good damage if you somehow land the hit. Has one of the highest super jumps in the game and has a strong counter. Mr. Incredible has a slow hit ratio though. He has two ways of laying the move though when it comes to his range attack. Both of them take forever to land though. However, even though Mr. Incredible does not have a projectile, which I said is going to bring down the character a lot, and a lot of these characters down a lot, his damage output is so good. And what I mean by damage output, not only his slow attacks are powerful, but his melee combos are really strong. The problem though for him, obviously why he's all the way down here into the low tier section, is because he does not have a safe approach to projectiles and certain characters overall. This character obviously has a high risk and high reward, and he's just playable enough to beat any character if they let him get the few hits in. But sometimes even that is not good enough to win the game. When it comes to Mr. Incredible, he is way better when he's fighting characters in his own league, such as the 1.0 and sometimes the 2.0. But if you add certain characters from the higher sections or the newer, he is way worse. Nick Fury is kind of everything you want from a character if he wasn't weak. His special works strategically because of how useful it is when you use it correctly, and when your opponent doesn't expect you to throw it out right away. Not only that, but Nick Fury has a shield. His counterattack for him doesn't pay off at all if you follow it all the way through. Yeah, Nick Fury, when he holds the melee attack, their opponent can literally move and they won't get hit by the full attack. So as long as they move, they are good to go. Overall, his game plan is usually shooting the blasters and strategically using the special move, and that's all the character really has. Yeah, some of his moves are completely hard to use or unusable at all. I'm not a big fan of his whole kit, but the positives he has aren't bad whatsoever. It's just the bad stuff about Nick Fury holds him back greatly. Even though I said that a lot of these characters benefit if they have a projectile, such as a shooting gun, which Nick Fury clearly has. When it comes to Nick Fury, it's just not enough. Next up is Miss Incredible. I thought she was incredible for sure. I put her pretty high up on mid tier, but thinking about it more and realizing that a certain move that I thought would stun lock characters leading to an infinite combo, the combo does not work. Because of that, the character is not as good as I initially thought, because this character has nothing else to fight with those weaknesses. You have melee attacks, which are good up close, and you have a range attack, which is good enough to put her this high up in the low tier, because her range attack can be used for mobility and can be used to bring in your opponent closer if they're a few feet away from you. Another reason why she belongs in the low tier is because when you get grabbed by a range attack, or all you need to do is hold the block button before she grabs you, and you could even do that as soon as she grabs you. You don't take any damage as the opponent when you're fighting against Miss Incredible, and you could easily punish her for that. You could purposely get hit by that range attack, take 0 damage, and punish her. This character is so bad. At least the character is good fighting up close compared to a lot of characters. I will say she's better than Nick Fury because Nick Fury needs to rely on using his projectiles, and Miss Incredible can easily break the shield with one range attack, even though I said you could block it. She does have some counterplay for not necessarily going for the range attack, even though it does help if your opponent doesn't block the move. Miss Incredible can use her other moves fine for her literally exploitable move, but even though the character is pretty complete, the character has a lot of weaknesses that will put her for sure into low tier. The last character in the low tier section, who's by far the worst Star Wars character in this game, is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan has good lightsaber combos, super jump, okay special, and can block projectiles with his lightsaber. He's also the first character I mentioned so far to have a lightsaber. He's also the first character I mentioned so far that has a force push. His special, I would say, is not worth investing in other than fighting enemies from playsets, or use it to get away from someone who's kicking you down. He doesn't have enough defense usage. The reason why he's the best low tier character out of all the other ones I talked about is because Obi-Wan has a projectile counter to him, and that's huge. Even though he doesn't have a projectile, and even though a lot of his attacks are trash, that alone is the reason why he's all the way up here. He overall has strengths to him, obviously. He even has mobility, a way to push away characters that need to come close to him. However, everything else about him is just not very impressive, especially compared to the other Star Wars characters. He doesn't have enough defense usage. Also, the way his melee attacks come out, it doesn't have a good enough speed to them or aggression to them, as Obi-Wan is clearly not a character that's designed for that. When he fights up close, it's not that difficult to deal with. He obviously has strengths that are very crucial to dealing with the specific good characters in this game. However, it's simply not good enough to get out the low tier section, as he has some pretty bad moves, and the only reason why he's all the way up here despite having flaws to his moveset is simply because his strengths are really beneficial to him. Another thing, though, his force push is good for close range attackers. Force pull characters are better for being able to combo extend them instead of just intercepting them from coming towards you. The whole point of a player versus player is to beat your opponent, to do it as the best way possible. Obi-Wan's force push does not push him all the way to victory with every single match that this character would have. And that's it for today. We talked about all the characters I would consider low tier. Now I'll continue to discuss more about every other character I haven't talked about so far, and discuss why they are better than the characters down here. Thank you all for watching. Another last thing I would like to mention, due to where I'm at right now, and because I'm kind of a loner, I don't have people or anyone that would know how to play this game. So the one person that was gratefully able to do some movement, help me figure out certain things with certain characters, is my dad. So shout outs to him. Definitely a good gamer, even though he doesn't think so. Even though he's on the older side, he's definitely on a good side, and I hope many of you will like to see more on this side of YouTube with me. And I hope everyone else is having a great day, having a great time, and I can't wait to show you more on what each character has in store, and we'll take it from there. Peace.